In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnetude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Welcome to a special episode on Shift and Thrive. Today's episode is a little different because my guest is someone I have the privilege of working with every day. Michele Johnston is the Director of Digital Delivery and our AI lead at Magnetude Consulting, bringing a practitioner's perspective and deep expertise across digital marketing, demand generation strategy, and the rapidly evolving ways B2B companies need to reach and influence today's buyers. And while I know she's extremely humble and would probably rather I skip this part, I feel like I owe it to her to give her a full and proper introduction. So with that, she is a digital marketing guru who's spent nearly 3 decades helping organizations navigate major waves of digital transformation, from the early days of the web to today's AI-driven environments. She has technical roots, having started her career in web development before moving into marketing and leadership, and has worked across digital strategy, marketing operations, customer experience, and website transformation for a broad range of organizations. She's been an integral part of my team for over 6 years, and today she leads our digital delivery team while spearheading our AI initiatives. Ultimately, her work is about helping B2B SMBs drive revenue impact through digital marketing and helping organizations modernize their go-to-market operations for a rapidly changing landscape. Michele Johnston, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Natalie.
We're very much looking forward to diving into the conversation, and I'd like to kind of start at the beginning. I know you've had a front row seat to nearly 3 decades of change in digital marketing, and there's been quite a lot of change, from the early web to the rise of search engines and then social media and marketing automation and now AI. So looking back across that evolution, can you share which changes do you feel have actually mattered the most?
A lot of times when we think about digital transformation, we think very technically, but really it's all been behavior based, right? People, the way people function, how they search for things, and what they expect. So really, most of the kind of shifts have been led by human behavior and what people expect out of products that they use or tools that they use.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think about those changes and kind of what that's meant, right? Like websites with being able to kind of self-serve and get information online, or be shopping in a store and getting that same information elsewhere. Social media, right, has definitely had significant changes. I'm curious if there's any that you feel really changed, had the biggest impact on how you do marketing.
Marketing is all about getting in front of the right person at the right time. And so I think maybe, honestly, things have shifted so much over, I think it's a little scary to think about 30 years, but this last 12 months, the shifts of how people find vendors or do their research for business-related purchases and compare and contrast them. I think this is one of the biggest behavior shifts we've seen, because it is somewhat upending a lot of the ways that we have marketed consistently over the last, 10 years. So it's changing search, it's changing paid search, it's changing organic. It's really kind of impacting everything that we do as marketers on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I do think that's one of the reasons why, it's easy to say that whatever is the thing happening in the moment is the thing that feels so different. But I do feel like AI does feel fundamentally different, and it's not just another kind of channel or platform. It's changes to kind of how the work gets done. I think we're seeing the pace of change is much faster. This is getting adopted much faster than some of the other things in the past. And then an area you touched on around how buyers consume information is changing, and how we as marketers can do things are changing. It's both sides of go-to-market are changing at the same time. I often talk about like a moving target, right? Because as you're kind of evolving how you run your marketing and operations, right? Like the audience is continuing to change too. So it is hard to kind of keep pace with that. I'm wondering if that brings anything else to mind for you.
One of the things I think it's important to keep in mind is that, it's easy when we say people's search behavior and AI usage behavior is changing to focus on the technologies when we should be focusing on the people. Like behind the search, behind the prompt, there's a person who's doing that work, who's trying to solve something. And so one way that it's very easy to get off track, like, and start chasing like shiny little things is looking at the technology behind search or behind, AI ingestion and things like that, instead of thinking about like, okay, this is a human being on the other end who's trying to solve something. What's the best way I can help them solve their problem with, the product or service I'm selling? It's
Yeah.
really easy to kind of like distract yourself and lose track of like where the ball is.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. And, every organization talks about being kind of customer focused and putting the customer first. But that simple lens of kind of what is this person trying to do? What are they trying to learn and understand is a really good lens. Where do you, where does that show up most? If you're talking to a CEO about like how that permeates the marketing, what are some of those places it needs to kind of be thought through?
If we had to put a percentage of time spent on certain things, I would say from a marketing perspective, more time needs to be spent on understanding the prospects and what they need. A lot of times, I mean, we see this in marketing. Sometimes it's like self-focused. Here's how we're great. Here's how we're wonderful. It's about solving their problem. And so it's like I said, it's easy to get distracted with like the technical. So think about it in terms of 20% of like, for example, SEO or AEO optimization. 10 to 20% of that is optimizing the website. 80% of that is the content you're writing. And is it actually resonant? Do people care? Are people searching for that? So it's really easy to focus on that 20%. Do we have an LLM.txt file? Do we have schema data? Well, are you even saying the right thing to the right person during that sales process or during the, research process? So kind of making sure that the team is really focused in on solving the problem, the pain points, removing the barriers to moving forward in the, buyer's process.
Right away with the kind of 80% content, I think of like SEO in the early days of like the keyword stuffing and now like AI slop, right? Write me a blog post on XYZ. And then companies wonder why that's not performing for them, right? Like that's not about the buyer and kind of what they're grappling with and something kind of nuanced and insightful that you can share with them that aligns back to your solution. I want to broaden a bit because we are talking about kind of search behaviors. And I know you've been working with some of our clients to kind of talk through and educate them on kind of what is changing in kind of the search landscape. Can you talk a bit about what organizations need to be thinking about differently?
Relative to search, it's shifting so quickly, and it's hard. It's a little bit hard to keep a pulse on it. I would be wary of people who know the answer. That would be the first thing, right? Because we're all looking for answers and figuring out what to do. And so I would be a little bit cautious when someone knows exactly what that answer is today. I think to me, the most important thing to be able to do is be like, I don't know. Let's test out some things and figure it out because there is just such a huge shift in behavior. We may have to be looking at different metrics or become a little bit more comfortable with metrics that don't exist. So for example, back in the day, we would run billboards, right? Or you did television spots. Like you would measure that much differently than we measure digital advertising, which has very specific numbers of impressions and clicks and things like that. Because the buyer journey of where they get information, what they do with it, and then where they go, and then how they end up on your website and in a meeting with you is shifted dramatically. That is not linear. And the numbers and metrics that we have in our system may or may not really reflect the true buyer journey of how they got there.
I want to come back to the topic around metrics because I think there's a lot for us to unpack there. Before we do that, I want to ask a bit about, either what questions you're getting from clients. Like, are you seeing resistance to kind of shifting some of these behaviors?
I'm not at all hearing any resistance to it necessarily. I think people really do understand it's shifting. I think there's a lot of fear because we were very comfortable with the old way of doing SEO, driving traffic. It didn't change. It's pretty consistent for quite a while. So we became comfortable in that. And so I think it's a little bit of discomfort in this change. Uncertainty always presents itself as anxiety. So I think we're seeing a lot more of that.
And before we move off this topic, can you talk a bit about kind of the zero click kind of phenomena and how that is playing into this world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I saw something recently. It's up to 70% of searches on Google do not end in a click. So people are using search, but the platform, Google and Bing, have changed so dramatically that it's not necessary to click through to a website anymore. So just simply relying on Google for your business as a source of leads is really dangerous. You really need to diversify where you are and where you're getting your prospects. And I think it's only going to continue to get worse if that's how you're looking at it, right? So that's going to continue to change. So we kind of have to shift. People are using it to search. I have a suspicion that a lot of people are doing research through Google to find companies and then creating a list and then using AI to compare these. Tell me who's better at this. Tell me who's better at that. So it's still part of their buyer journey, but just how they're using it is what's changing.
I think, you feel a fear, you're kind of looking at things differently, then you see a decrease in the numbers that creates more fear, it just creates kind of this uncertainty. But I think we are seeing a bit of this kind of what's old is new again, right? Because it is so easy to create content, automatically post it online. Like there's just so much noise in the digital world. And the reality is we live in a heavily digital world. So there's no getting away from that. We're not eliminating digital marketing by any means. But I think we're also seeing clients having success with, in-person events and hosting roundtable dinners and things like that again. That you kind of break the mold and really figure out what you can do differently than what your competitors are doing, or how can you kind of humanize those interactions. Hey, this is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. So, Michele, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how leaders evaluate marketing performance, because I think in the context of all of these things that are changing, like the ability we have to connect every marketing activity cleanly to a lead, an opportunity, a sale is increasingly challenging. And not that it was ever easy, but I think all of these kind of nonlinear buying habits are driving more of that, right? If people are doing their research through peer groups and review sites and now LLMs, and all of these things happen long before someone is filling out a form or talking to sales. There's all the reasons that it's hard to draw that straight line. So I want to talk a little bit about how CEOs and other leaders should decide and understand whether their marketing is working when there isn't a very kind of simple data answer to that.
There's not a simple answer. And there's so much in addition to zero click and people's behaviors. We're also looking at cookie lists. We're not able to track people the way we used to be able to. GDPR and other privacy regulations we're seeing huge impacts on that, of just what data we're able to even get. I would say the first thing is look at lead generation from marketing sources at the top level. rather than digging in, especially for a CEO, to be digging in at what's paid media delivering, what's search, what's this, what's that, what are looking at it from a more holistic standpoint, because ultimately we are going to be getting leads coming in that have no attribution. They're going to look like direct traffic or unknown sources. They might look like organic searches, but who knows all the different places they interacted with us. So top line lead generation, and quality of those leads as well. And again, I think it's a little bit of like sitting with the discomfort of not knowing exactly what might be contributing to those. There certainly are some platforms that could do multi-touch attribution, if you have the budget for something like that. But for those of us who don't, kind of shifting how we're able to look at, just from an overall perspective where those leads are coming.
Yeah. Well, I know you and I talked about this in the past of just, how did we get to where we are? And I think, marketing was notoriously like a bit of a black box and coming kind of from the advertising world, like decades ago, where you just had to put stuff out there and kind of hope that it had an impact, or larger companies could run these like big brand awareness studies. That's like, it was never accessible to smaller companies just because of the numbers and the dollars and all of that. And then during the COVID era, when everyone moved online, and all of a sudden you couldn't track a lot of stuff, and so little was happening offline, that I think a lot of like confidence and attention went towards like digital metrics. And so I think that just exacerbates why the challenges we're facing today in some ways kind of make it seem like pointing a finger at marketing, or there must be an easier, better way to do our reporting that our team hasn't figured out. That's going to make it kind of very obvious. I know you've talked about that kind of gumball phenomena. If you want to speak to that, because I think that factors into kind of just the mindset going into kind of where and how marketing has an impact and kind of how that's viewed.
Yeah. So digital marketing, the good thing is that we can get all sorts of metrics. The bad thing is that we can get all sorts of metrics, and it's easy to become comfortable with looking at those. But yeah, you can't just run one ad and get one lead. It just doesn't work like that. And I think if we step back, think about how, I certainly, how I function. If I do a search, I find a company, I'm likely not like filling out that lead form immediately, but yet that's the expectation, even though we don't behave that way ourselves. So it's not dollar in, dollar out. We do this channel, we get something out. I'm an endurance athlete. And so, for example, with triathlon, there's swim, bike, run, right? And when you're training for an Ironman, you don't do the full distances each of those. When you build your training plan, this week's training builds next week's workouts, right? And then you grow to the point where you're able to do the event. Everything is cumulative. All your training is cumulative. So I think we have to look at marketing in that same way, of all of the work that we're doing is cumulative. Something might get that, check mark. Oh, we got the lead in through email or whatever it was, but we need to, everything else built around it is helping for that to happen. And really, this is marketing 101 back decades, reach and frequency. So we need to get out in front of people, and they need to be able to see your message a certain number of times before they make that connection. So kind of like going back to basics, I feel like, let's make sure we're talking to the person in their language, about their pain points. Let's make sure we're reaching out to them in multiple channels, multiple ways, that we're present in the places where they are when they are researching that issue that they're having.
I think this starts to take me down the path of talking about like lead generation and demand generation versus brand awareness, which I think will be an interesting topic for us to get into. I have one other area on metrics that I wanted to ask you, and I think we've encountered this situation where our organization might not have had a lot of comprehensive marketing. They might have one or two salespeople, But so leadership knows they don't have like full visibility into kind of what's happening. Maybe someone set up Google Analytics a number of years ago, hasn't touched it too much since. So if someone knows they don't have that kind of visibility, like where would you recommend they start? Like what are some of those kind of fundamentals or baselines to get in place?
So taking a look at web traffic and where people are coming in now. Taking a look at your leads and are we able to tell at all where they're coming in out? And so kind of leveraging that as a baseline, just kind of level set of what looks like might be working now. The next thing I do, honestly, would rather than looking at the metrics internally, I was searching the user research of where are they? Who is your audience? Where are they? Because some might be on Reddit, some might be on at events, like really kind of truly understand where they live, and then go back to your metrics and kind of overlay that. Like, how we know how our prospects are behaving. Do we have programs in place to hit those? And do we already see any potential leverage that we have in those areas?
So let's talk about the brand versus demand, because I think as we're talking about what leaders can measure, what actually drives growth, I think this is the conversation that keeps coming up. And I'll admit I've had a little bit of a shift in my own mindset over the recent years where I sit on this debate. But just for the listeners' benefit, like put simply, we know this kind of brand versus demand argument is that demand generation is about creating opportunities now. Brand building, on the other hand, is more about making sure buyers know like which companies to trust so that you get into the consideration set, like when someone's getting ready to act. And despite everything we just shared about metrics, like demand oriented activity is generally like somewhat easier to track, whereas brand investments go over a longer period of time. They don't like show up as neatly in a dashboard. And I know we've talked about this, like it's becoming like more and more important, right? As the market becomes noisier and trust is harder to earn. So wanted to just see how do you think about the role of brand and what does that look like when it's not like immediately visible in the numbers?
Brand absolutely supports lead gen. When you are only running lead gen and demand gen, you are really focused at a very particular point in time in that buyer's journey, and you might have missed that window. B2B buyers are somewhere between 65 and 70% through their buying journey by the time they make their short list and reach out to companies to talk to. Marketing's job is to get on those lists. If you're waiting until that last few days when they're about to pick up you've kind of missed that window. And again, I guess back to marketing 101, right? Only a certain percent of your total market audience is ever in market for your services at any given time. That doesn't mean you should ignore them, right? That's why cars advertise year round, even though like people are only in the market during a very short period of time, because you want that brand recognition. So yes, it is like long term, but if you're only thinking constantly short term, you're really not thinking of the bigger picture. It's really important to make sure that brand piece is in there. And I kind of feel like brand versus demand is more of like a spectrum than two particular buckets, right? So if you have a lot of your budget in terms of people, time, and dollars in demand gen, there's some channels and some other things you can do that might be a little bit more along the lines of brand, a little bit less demand, but still give you kind of that bump, so you don't have to necessarily spend across the entire spectrum of brand and demand, but having both of those, like brand 100% supports demand generation.
I think the other component to that I often think about that I think isn't maybe as talked about is the sales side of things, right? That by not investing in brand, you're putting a greater burden on your salesperson, sales team. And I've seen like a strong sales rep join a company and then realize that like especially if it's someone who came from like a bigger company with some brand awareness, that like every conversation they have, they're fighting harder to get that first conversation. It starts one step further back than what they expected, because they're the ones that then need to talk about like who the company is, like prove that credibility, convince the buyer that it was even worth like taking that first call, versus that's like such a important place for marketing to provide that air cover. And especially in a world where, anyone can spin up a company, a website, like look like they have something legitimate, even when they don't. Like it's going to be increasingly harder for buyers to know who to trust. And so by kind of being out there, you're really supporting sales from having to do that kind of that legwork or just missing opportunities altogether.
The philosophical line between marketing and sales, I feel like, is getting very, very fuzzy, because when people are doing their research and they're making their short list, they have just so much more information and tools available to them to do that work. The more you can put out on your site, the marketing team in any, not just on your site, but anywhere, that is going to help to not just talk about who your company is, but how it's going to solve the issues, like even technical sheets, anything like that, that's going to help remove those sales barriers. Whatever the sales team is hearing as a barrier in their phone calls or objection, address that in your marketing. Remove those now, because that's just going to help the prospects to do their research and get you onto that short list. So it's getting a little fuzzy. I think a lot of people are, if you don't have that information out, they can't do the research. I think people are spending the same amount of time doing the research. I don't think they are necessarily putting in as much effort. And this is going to sound a little bit weird, but it's our job to make sure that all of those materials and all of that information and all of those barriers are addressed, because if we don't address them, they're just simply not going to pick up the phone. Right? If it's not available on our site, if it's not being absorbed and surfaced in AI when they're doing those comparisons, we're just not going to make the short list.
Right. Well, those are the things that never even show up in the metrics to begin with, because they're never making it onto anyone's radar. So it's a missed opportunity you never even realized you missed. The other thing you were making me think about with the blurring lines between sales and marketing is like sales historically was kind of the one-to-one and marketing was the one-to-many. And I think part of that line blurring is like with sales automation now, sales can kind of do the one-to-many, and marketing with kind of personalization at scale can do the kind of one-to-one, even though it's not really one-to-one. So I think that those blurred lines come at it from that perspective too. And I think that harms things too, because when sales is doing the one-to-many without like good the personalization behind it, they're turning off their audience. When marketing is doing the kind of fake personalization, I'll call it, like without the right kind of data and insights behind it, they're having a similar kind of impact.
Yeah. And you have a situation where your left arm and your right arm might be doing two completely different things if there's no synergy between what those efforts look like.
I'd love to shift the conversation and talk a little bit more on the personal side. You talked about being a competitive athlete, and I've always very much admired and love hearing the stories of all the different adventures that you've been on. But I know you've talked about kind of parallels between kind of being an endurance athlete and business. Would love to hear if there's like a story from that side of your life that has stayed with you.
It's one of my favorite ways to like draw parallels between what I do for my work and what I do outside of work. Yeah, so I've done over 100 endurance events, lots of triathlon, a couple Ironman, a lot of like longer endurance events. And probably the thing that sticks with me the most that I wish I could package and sell to people is that the biggest thing that really helps with, in long-term endurance events is just consistency. For the vast majority of like workouts, they're all just kind of boring, not, they're not big efforts, right? Like, so maybe 10% of them are like, oh, great, that was fantastic. And then another 10% are like, oh my God, what am I even doing? why am I doing this to myself? But most of it's just like, I go out and do the workout and I'm done and go on with my day. But it is the consistency of doing that day after day, week after week, month after month, that gets you to completing an Ironman or a 10K swim or something like that. I really feel marketing is very similar to that, where it's, we're doing a lot of different things and not everything is immediately measurable. But if you don't do those things, it's going to hinder your goals and your outcomes.
Yeah. I'm curious, and again, bringing it back to kind of the marketing side when we were talking about measurement, I would imagine with this kind of training for an endurance event doesn't happen overnight. So you're doing these small things that build over time. Like, how do you know and kind of trust that you're doing the right things, that you're pushing yourself hard enough or not too hard too early? Like, how do you find that balance?
After nearly 20 years in endurance, I'm going to say the answer is the experience for me. But for a lot of people, they don't know. You kind of do have to trust the process. Having someone there to support you, like I don't know that I could have done that without a coach, without having someone who was giving me the guidance and the direction, and who was the rock that I needed when I was just absolutely questioning everything.
Is there a favorite kind of event or something you competed in that comes to mind that you could share?
A couple things. One, I did a 10K swim in 2020 with a friend for fun. That was during COVID. And it was kind of like we didn't plan for it, but we were doing a ton of swimming. So we just decided to go for it. And that was a lot of fun because it was just us out there and our friends and kayaks. And it was a blast. And last year, so I'm starting to get more into, and actually, I think this kind of relates into marketing as well. I'm starting to get into mountain biking more. So I did this really super fun race in northern Michigan called the Crusher, and it was like 55 miles. So it was like 7 to 8 hour event, but it was so far, you can't get more off the grid than the Keeneland Peninsula up in northern Michigan. There's no connectivity. So it's like, they're like, here's the route. Good luck. You can't call anybody. Like literally, there's no one to call if you fall, get hurt or whatever. So that was just fun because I was super out of my comfort zone to be just out there by no one but myself to kind of finish.
I do think about like how, and I said this often, it's like how much energy there is like on race day or something that like something I possibly couldn't possibly think I would be able to complete. Like you just have a different energy when there's people around you. So I think like to that point, like when you show up and you have only yourself, there's I'm sure a lot of, I don't know, like mental games, kind of tricks or whatnot that are helpful. Are there anything that works for you, or any mottos or anything that you tell yourself?
You just kind of learn how to suffer with endurance sport. It's like people who are successful are the people who can survive the suffering the most. And when you do something harder and harder and harder, it resets your brain of what hard means.
There's like an important lesson there in getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Yeah. Because this podcast is all about transformation, right? Whether it's like the organization, the department, the person, and a lot of that is like it's uncomfortable. You're pushing it through some very different things than what you've experienced before.
Anything could have gone wrong that day. Luckily it didn't really. But yeah, getting comfortable and trusting yourself and learning from yourself as you go.
Yeah. I want to close up the conversation, Michele, with something I like to ask all of my guests. And that is, what is the best piece of advice you've received that still influences you today?
Yeah. So my dad always used to tell us, keep your options open. It's almost like the family joke. Like that's always the thing that he's been telling us. And now as a grown up, I understand what he was talking about, but just always making sure that like you leave room for anything to happen. Don't close doors, don't burn those bridges, keep your options open.
I love that. And I can see how that can permeate so many different facets of life. So good advice. And as we wrap up today's conversation, for listeners who want to follow more of your thinking, what's the best place to connect with you?
That would be LinkedIn.
Wonderful. That's always mine as well. Well, Michele, thank you so much for this. I know it pushed you a bit outside your comfort zone, so I appreciate you coming along for the ride with me. And I loved the chance to bring some of the conversations that, we have internally at Magnitude into the podcast, especially like your perspectives on kind of the shifts in digital and then marketing, conversation around kind of the metrics and the importance of investing in both brand and demand. So many valuable takeaways for what I think a lot of leaders are grappling with now. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you too for everyone listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, and I'm sure that it did, please pass this along to another leader in your network, because we know these are the kinds of conversations that help all of us scale smarter, build stronger, and create more resilient go-to-market engines. So thank you again, Michele. And this has been another wonderful conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnetude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.